Good day everyone, I am Garzula and together with my partner Espinosa, we will discuss the lesson 2 which is about implementing a curriculum daily in classrooms. But before we start, let me present to you the desired learning outcomes of this topic. So at the end of this lesson, we will be able to review the components of a daily plan for teaching, identify intended learning outcomes, and lastly, match learning outcomes with appropriate teaching methods. BTLED Order Number 70, Series of 2012, states that teachers of all public elementary and secondary schools will not be required to prepare detailed lesson plans that may adopt daily lesson logs which contain the needed information and guide from the teacher guide and teacher manual reference material with page number, interventions given to the students and remarks to indicate how many students have mastered the lesson or are needing remediation. So BTLED Order Number 70 states that the teachers are not required na to prepare detailed lesson plans. Meaning is kanang dili na required ang teachers nga mag-prepare pag detailed lesson plans. And instead, they may adopt daily lesson logs which contain already the needed information from the teacher guide and teacher manual which was provided by the BTLED, and also they can give interventions to the students and remarks to indicate how many students have mastered the lesson and those who are needing remediation. So however, teachers with less than 2 years of teaching experience shall be required to prepare daily lesson plans which shall include the following: objectives, subject matter, procedure, assessment, and assignment. If you are a teacher who have experienced more than 2 years, then you are not required to prepare detailed lesson plans. But if you are teachers with less than 2 years of teaching experience, then you are required to prepare daily lesson plans with this format like naay objective, subject matter, procedure, assessment, and assignment. Starting the class right, laying down the curriculum plan. A teacher must have written a lesson plan. So before the class begins or starts every day, the teacher must have a written lesson plan. And ngano? It's because lesson plan serves as guide to us teachers in teaching or delivering our lessons in the classroom. Bali mo na siya magsilbing guide nato, and through lesson plans, it also helps us in organizing the methods and the strategies that we will use when delivering the lesson, so that kanang ma-ensure nato nga ang lesson nga atong itudlo is ma-deliver natog tarong o masabtan sa atong students. So naay main parts ang lesson plans, and these are: first is the objectives or intended learning outcomes. Second is the subject matter. Third is the procedure strategies of teaching. Four is the assessment of learning outcomes. And fifth is the assignment of agreement. And these parts is what we will tackle in this lesson. We have here the intended learning outcomes, which is the first part in lesson plan. So what is intended learning outcomes? So these are the desired learning that will be the focus of the lesson. Meaning that ILO is the main focus or the objectives of your lesson. And as a teacher, it is what you want for your students to acquire or accomplish at the end of the discussion or lesson. So learning outcomes are based on taxonomy of objectives presented to us as cognitive, affective, and psychomotor. So Bloom's taxonomy has revisited by his own student Lauren Anderson and David Cratwell. So it states here that learning outcomes are based on taxonomy. meaning that in creating learning outcomes, you can base it in Bloom's taxonomy. Why? It's because Bloom's taxonomy helps the teacher because it provides a guide that can be used in creating objectives. So we have here the Bloom's taxonomy, the old version and the revised one. So under the Bloom's taxonomy at 1956 are evaluation, synthesis, analysis, application, comprehension, and knowledge. And under the revised Bloom's taxonomy of 2001 are the creating, evaluating, analyzing, applying, understanding, and remembering. So as you can see at the table, there are three major changes in the revised taxonomy. First is the changing the names in the 6 categories from nouns to verbs. So as you can see, the evaluation became evaluating in the revised one. So evaluation is the noun and evaluating is verbs. So from noun nahimo siyang action word. So the next nga na change is rearranging these categories. So na-rearrange ang categories in the revised Bloom's taxonomy. Like say for example, the evaluation is na siya sa top, then sa revised one na siya sa second in line. So next is establishing the levels of the knowledge level in the original version. So na-establish po ang levels of knowledge nga na aning mga categories. Like say for example, sa evaluation na siya sa higher order thinking skills sa old version, while sa revised Bloom's taxonomy version is na siya sa second in line na lang, which is ang creating na ang nahimong higher order thinking skills. So mo nang three major changes nga na change in Bloom's taxonomy. Now, let us study the cognitive categories with the example keywords for each in the new version of Bloom's taxonomy. So here at the right side are the categories that is under in the revised Bloom's taxonomy, and at the left side is the example keywords that we can use in creating learning outcomes. So the first category is remembering. It is to recall or retrieve previous learned information. Example keywords are defines, describes, identifies, labels, lists, outlines, selects, states. Next category is understanding. It is to comprehend meaning, translation, state problems in own words, and making meaning. Example keywords are comprehends, explains, distinguishes, estimates, gives examples, interprets, predicts, rewrites, and summarizes. Next category is applying. Use concept in new situation, applies what has been learned in new situation. Example keywords are applies, changes, computes, operates, constructs, modifies, uses, manipulates, prepares, shows, solves. Next is analyzing. It separates materials or concepts into component parts so that the organization is clear, distinguishes between facts and inferences. Example keywords are breakdown, compares, contrast, diagrams, differentiates, discriminates, identifies, infers, outlines, relates, selects, and separates. Next is evaluating. It makes judgments about the value of ideas or materials. Example keywords are appraises, compares, criticizes, defends, describes, discriminates, identifies, infers, outlines, relates, selects, and separates. And the last category is creating. It builds a structure or pattern from various elements. Put parts together to create a whole to make new meaning and structure. So example keywords are composes, compiles, designs, generates, modifies, organizes, rearranges, reorganizes, revises, rewrites, summarizes, and creates. In writing objectives or intended learning outcomes, it is always recommended that more of the higher order thinking skills should be developed and less of the low-level thinking skills for learners. The low-level categories will develop lost, and thinking skills progress are the categories move higher. So, when creating objectives or learning outcomes in our lesson plans, it is recommended na mas mo gamit ta sa higher order thinking skills nga mga activities kaysa sa low level thinking skills kay nga naman. It's because it will challenge our learners, and it will develop more their level of thinking skills. So this is the order thinking skills, and as you can see in the slide, the lower order thinking skill is the remembering. Kaya nga it's because remembering only requires a low level of thinking. Like kanang madali lang siya ni students og acquired. Mo ni siyang learning outcomes kanang madali lang i-acquired. Like say for example, mag-define, describe, mag-list, or mag-label lang siya. And to be followed by understanding, applying, analyzing, evaluating, and ang pinaka sa top is creating. So as you can see, nagaanam-anam siya ka higher ang level, meaning pud ana is kanang nagaanam-anam pod og kataas ang gina-require niya nga level of thinking sa isa ka learner. So ang nasa higher order thinking skills is si creating. Why? It's because creating requires high level of thinking skills. It's because diri na siya mag-design, mag-create, or mag-generate og new ideas or concepts nga iyang na-acquire along the lessons. So mao na siya ang higher order thinking skill. Levels of knowledge. First is factual knowledge. It's ideas or specific data or information. To put it simply, factual knowledge is a knowledge that derives from facts. Next is conceptual knowledge. It's words or ideas known by common name, common features, multiple specific examples, which may either be concrete or abstract. Concepts are facts that interrelate with each other to function together. To put it simply, it is a knowledge that derives from concepts. Next is procedural knowledge. It is how things work, step-by-step actions, methods of inquiry. In simpler terms, it is a knowledge that derives from procedure. And lastly is the metacognitive knowledge. So it is a knowledge of cognition in general, awareness of knowledge of one's own cognition. It is thinking about thinking. So we can understood metacognitive knowledge as a knowledge about cognitive tasks and self-knowledge. So here remember that intended learning outcomes should be written in smart way. And when we say smart way, it is specific, measurable, attainable, result-oriented, and time-bound. So meaning when we create our intended learning outcomes, when we say it should be specific, you should use clear and direct language in telling on exactly what the learners should learn. Next is measurable. So when we speak about measurable, it is something you can measure. Kalang diri i-determine nimo if the learner can meet and perform the learning outcome ni imong gibuhat. And next is attainable. So pag mingon tag attainable, it means that it is achievable. Meaning, achievable siya sa imong students. Like, makaya sa imong students. And next is result-oriented or outcomes. So, kaning result-oriented is maoning outcome. Meaning is kanang dapat relevant ang imong objective nga buhaton. And next, and lastly is time-bound. So, pag may tag time-bound meaning is dapat sakto sa oras ang imuhang objectives nga gipangbuhat. So, next part, the second part in lesson plan is the subject matter or content. So, when we speak about subject matter content, it comes from a body of language, the facts, concepts, procedures, and metacognition that will be learned through the guidance of the teacher. So, subject matter is the what in teaching. In a plan, this is followed by the reference. So, subject matter no is mo ni ang what sa teaching, meaning is mo nang imong itudlo sa imong students. Like mo ni siya ang main topic or ang lesson nga imong itudlo sa imong students.
Now, let's continue. Let's discuss the procedure or methods and strategy. So, procedure or methods and strategies. So, we all know that teaching strategies are methods and techniques that a teacher will use to support their pupils or students through the learning process. And in addition to that, teaching methods are the broader techniques used to help students achieve learning outcomes. So class, listen carefully of what I've been going to discuss this day because this strategy will help you in the future because as a future teacher, we will use this kind of strategy to teach our students and for them to understand what we're talking about. Okay? Very good. So at this moment, class, we will discuss more what is procedure or methods and strategies. And you know what? According to Corpus and Salandanan 2013, that there are many ways of teaching for the different kind of learners. And you know what, class? Here is some strategy that will may be useful for the different kind of learners. So the first on the list is direct demonstration methods. It's guided exploratory, discovery approach, inquiry method, problem-based learning or BL, and project methods. The second one is cooperative learning approaches. So peer tutoring, learning action cells, and think, pair, share. The third one is deductive or inductive approach, such as project methods, inquiry-based learning. And lastly is other approaches such as blended learning, reflective teaching, integrated learning, and outcomes-based approach. So right now, class, we all know that students have different learning style, like for us. Because as a student, we have different ways that we can learn. Like for example, we can learn in terms of hearing or a visual. So right now, as a future educator, it is very important to us to know this kind of strategies of learning because it will help us so that our student in the future will easily understand all of the topics that we are about to teach. Okay, so please listen carefully. Right now, class, there are many classification of learning styles according to the different authors. And the multiple intelligence theory of Howard Gardner implies several learning styles. But for our lesson, we will focus on the three learning styles, which are visual, auditory, and kinesthetic. So these three preferred styles can help teacher choose methods and materials they will use. So let's go forward. So right now we will discuss visual learning. So visual learners can utilize into graphs, charts, map, diagrams, and other form of visual stimulation to effectively interpret information. And you know what, class? Visual learning is also helps students to develop visual thinking, which is a learning style whereby the learners comes better to understand and retain information better by associating ideas, words, and concepts with images. And right now, the second one is auditory learning. So, auditory learning is a learning style in which a person learns through listening. And auditory learners depends on listening and speaking as a main way of learning. And class, remember, if you are an auditory learner, you learn by hearing and listening. You understand and remember things you have heard. You store information by the way it sounds, and you have an easier time understanding spoken instruction than written ones. And lastly, kinesthetic learning style. It prefers on hands-on approach, demonstrate how to do rather than explain. And this kind of learner likes group works with hands-on, minds-on. And you know what, class? This kinesthetic learning takes place by the student carrying out physical activities rather than listening to a lecture or watching demonstration. And you know what, class? Kinesthetic learners are the most hands-on learning type. They learn best by doing things or doing activities by their own. And kinesthetic learning do best when they can participate in activities or solve problems in a hands-on manner. And right now, class, before we proceed to our next topic, I would like to ask, what kind of teaching are you preferred? Are you a visual learner, an auditory learner, or a kinesthetic learner? Is anyone? Can you please raise your hand? What kind of learner are you? Wow, very good. Thank you so much for your effort in answering this kind of question. I really appreciate your effort in participating our discussion for this day. So right now, let's proceed to our next discussion for this day. And you know what, class? I really love this kind of lesson that we are about to discuss to you this day because it teaches us what are the materials or what style of teaching we are about to use so that our student will easily understand our lesson. Okay, so right now, teaching and learning must be supported by instructional materials, right? So considering the teaching methodologies and learning style, the different support materials should be. So instructional materials should complement visual, auditory, and tactile, or a combination of the three. However, following Dale's cone of learning, which is visual device, can help teachers or can help us to make decision on what resources and materials will maximize learning. And right now, class, as what can you see on your screen right now, that is the cone of learning. So let's discuss. So the first one in the upper part of it is reading. The next one is hearing words. Next one is looking at pictures, watching a movie, looking at an exhibit, watching a demonstration, seeing it done on location. Next one is participating in the discussion, giving a talk, and lastly, doing a dramatic presentation, simulating the real experience, doing the real thing. So, class, according to Cone of Learning, that after 2 weeks, we tend to remember 10% of what we read, 20% of what we hear, 30% of what we see, 50% of what we see and hear, 70% of what we say, and 90% of what we say and do. And I would like to ask class, do you agree with that? Aha, that's pretty great. You know what? You have a very great idea regarding with that. Thank you so much. So for me, class, I can truly believe, and I believe with this cone of learning, which is that 90% of what we say and do after 2 weeks, we tend to remember it, right? Because for me, I am a type of learner that is a kinesthetic learner rather, which I do prefer to do or to experience that thing or doing the real thing. So the moment that I do that things or that kind of activities on my own that I am hands on that, I cannot really easily to forget those things. But class, remember, we don't judge other because different person, different kind of learning strategies. Okay, so let's respect their learning. So method and materials must implement the plan, taking action. So example number 1, lesson using basic steps. Okay, class, as you can see on your screen right now, that is one of the example on how to make a lesson plan. So this is our example. So lesson plan in science. So you must always remember that when you are making a lesson plan, this is the thing that you must remember. So the first on the list is that you have your objectives. So your intended learning outcomes. Okay, guys. So next on the list is your subject matter. So your learning content, where your topic, your references, because when you're making a lesson plan, it is very important that you have your references. Okay, and you can also see there your materials that you're about to use. So right now, as you can see, there is an assessment of learning outcomes. So we can also include that one in our lesson plan. And lastly, you can also include the assignment. Okay, so you know what, class, why I am discussing this one to you, because lesson plan is very important, especially to us as a future educator, because teacher are always making a lesson plan, right? So right now it is very important that as soon as possible, as early as we are, as early as now, we all know how to do a lesson plan. Okay, very good. Okay, class, let's have our quick recap regarding on how to use or to make a lesson plan. So the first one, you must have your learning outcomes. Like for example, at the end of the lesson, the student are able to, expected to learn like this. So the second one is subject matter or your learning content, where you can find your references or the materials that you are about to use. The next on the list is the procedure or learning experiences, where you can find your priority activities or like a review or checking an attendance or like that. Then the next on the list is you can also include the assessment or you can also put your assignment there. So that's it. So by the way, class, thank you so much for listening our discussion for this day. And I hope that you learned a lot regarding with our topics. So I will not take so much of your time. Thank you so much and have a wonderful day. Bye for now and have a wonderful day to you, ma'am. Thank you so much.